Just before I came online this morning, a whole bunch of media started throwing this article up or related. We have in Australia four big banks. We have many banks, but four big ones: ANZ, Westpac, National Australia Bank, and the Commonwealth Bank. Now, some of them have emerged out of previous banks in the past or have emerged out of other institutions before. Now, me just trying to recall it off the top of my head would be completely wrong, but they all have a big history. Now, we've got other smaller banks and credit unions and other financial institutions and stuff, but if you want to see what's going on in Australia's finances, particularly consumer level finance, you look at what the big four are doing because when they shift on interest rates or things like that, generally the rest of the market follows. There's been enough of a break from that, particularly in the mortgage supply market, that a bunch of independents came along, a bunch of third parties came along and sort of broke the stranglehold, well, threatened the stranglehold the majors had. Now, a lot of these little independents were being underwritten by a large bank, but the big four will still largely set the direction of the market. Through the late 90s into the since the late 90s, the big banks have been, I won't say abandoning regional Australia, they've been consolidating their branches. I think that's the political term for pulling their services out of small towns. But they've been consolidating their branches because keeping a branch open in smaller towns and regional centres was not economically viable. And so when you're making billions of dollars a quarter or a year, yes, apparently keeping half a dozen people on staff in a small town is too much for the bottom line. Yep, cool, whatever. Now, the reason why Australia's relationships with the big banks is kind of weird too, because it's almost a national sport to complain about them. Yet, at the same time, a lot of Australian retirements are either managed by the banks or have holdings of bank stocks as a not insignificant portion of their market presence for their retirement funds. So, yes, on the one hand, we whine about the banks being vicious to their own customers, knowing that they've got nowhere else to go, yet at the same time relying on the market value of the bank to prop up the value of our superannuation and our retirements. Now, the ANZ is one of those four and has been shutting down branches left, right, and centre and so on and so forth over the years, like the others have. And now it's obviously a live article, they're talking about taking the next 12 months to cut 3,500 employees. It says broad restructure. Now, that sort of statement generally means they're not going to shut down. All 3,500 cuts won't come from branches. They might. Now, the National Bank, for example, well, actually, no. I mean, even in the period that we've lived in our current location, the nearby shopping centre, when we arrived, had all four banks, all four majors present in the shopping centre itself. The first bank to leave was the Commonwealth. They moved across the street and down the road to a smaller branch outlet. They're still there. Okay, so Commonwealth is still there. The ANZ moved from the ground floor upstairs, so made it a little bit harder to get to. Took away all their tellers and put in some smarter ATMs. And then there's a couple of, I think they've cut their employee numbers by 2/3. And so the services they provide have changed. If you're going to bring in cash and do things, it's almost like you have to ring ahead, book ahead to do it. So, but they're still there. The National Australia Bank used to have several tellers and loan services and all that sort of stuff, like a proper full branch. They completely shut their branch down, and now the well, not just the suburb or the place I live isn't serviced by the National Bank anymore, the National Australia Bank, but it was the closest branch for, well, many more people. And now we've got to go even further abroad to try and find the next nearest branch. And then Westpac, and they still exist. They are undergoing, well, actually, are they? No, they've had boards up. Either they're refurbishing or they've moved out. So, yeah. And we're in a larger regional, like we'd expect them to still have branches. I mean, when I was a kid growing up, the town I lived in, maybe 6,000 people on a good day, they had a branch. Each of the majors had a branch. In fact, they had big branches. They were nice, big buildings, but um, like really old stone buildings. Lovely things. But yeah, there were branches for each of the majors back then. Anyway, so yeah, so they're talking about cutting 3,500, and that it's going to affect contractors and everything else, and it's going to cost them. Well, they're going to put $560 million on the book of restructuring costs, but it's one of those things that when you see this pop up, uh, the it raises questions about the future of the retail side of things, i.e., walking in and getting money out of out from the teller. So they still cut jobs, but this seems to be more back end stuff. Question is, how's it going to affect service delivery? Now they say it's because we're trying to reduce duplication and internal complexity. It's like, well, what have you been doing for the last 40 years? Um, we'll see. We'll see. But I don't think they're alone in doing this. But again, get me back on my high horse about infrastructure and services to regional Australia or even non-regional Australia. Yeah, the bank goes and does this. A big bank goes and does this. Now, they've got to do it at some point, I guess. But yeah, um, big numbers. Now, I wonder whether it's going to be symptomatic of other things coming down the line. Are there going to be other industries that are suddenly going to pop up and go, oh, we're cutting thousands of roles and jobs and everything else? Or is this just something in isolation? Worth keeping an eye on, I think.